Yeah, on.
Two twins. Yeah. Ba-da-ba. Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. Yeah. Ba-da. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's James talking about? I don't know. Keep saying yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was kind of going more for the Howard the Duck, you know? Howard the Duck. Yeah.
Yeah. Howard the Duck. Have you watched Howard the Duck like in the last 20 years?
I haven't. It's probably either like phenomenal or awful. I'll tell you what, though, I've got my next film that I'm going to watch is the Dirt Bike Kid. You know, the old what was that kid's name? Robert Billingsley, the Christmas Story kid.
Oh yeah, like the other movie he was in, the Dirt
Bike Kid. Yeah, so same thing with that. It's either going to be. It's probably going to be amazing either way. It's either going to be like great or just awful, but probably,
Let us not forget your favorite of all of the, 80s. What is it? What would that genre be called? We need to name that genre, but that's sort of bad 80s movies with activities.
Like sports or activities. Yeah, right.
Not really sports because like those are good.
Are you going to bring up Rad?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. That's your penultimate.
But Rad is legitimately amazing. I mean, come on, like, you got Crew Jones. It's a BMX movie, right? You got the bad guy, the blonde, not the Karate Kid guy, but similar, right? Bart, what's his name? Bart, whatever, And then of course the Reynolds twins. I mean,
you love those Reynolds twins.
The scene when they're playing Sparks and they're at the dance and the Reynolds twins get on either side of that chick and they're like pretty much grinding her and sort of each other. It's just amazing.
It's like a bicycle grind.
Well, and then, the bicycle boogie is when they play Send Me an Angel, and he and who's the gal that went to jail for getting her kid into USC? The Full House gal.
She's very hot. Lori Laughlin.
Uncle Jesse's wife. Yeah, super hot. And I think, didn't she go to jail? She faked a bunch of transcript info for her kid to get into USC or something funny.
It's an odd thing. I was thinking, I've been thinking about that. Like, I'm no lawyer or judge or anything, but like jail seems awfully harsh for that. I mean, I understand that like on some level it's fraud, but with all the things that people are doing nowadays and not going to jail and getting away with it, it just felt very strange that like she went to jail for that. Like you can't be out in society for that.
I mean, there's obviously some selective justice out there, but you also have to make an example of those folks. I mean,
that's what it is. Yeah.
You can't be like blatantly lying to get your kid into a certain college. That's just, So she did that scene, right, where they're in slow motion and they're like doing all the bike tricks and everyone makes a circle around them at the dance. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And it's also pretty amazing that this is presumably a high school dance. And even at that stage, Lori Laughlin had to be at least 30, Oh, really? You think so? Playing a high school girlfriend. I don't know. I mean, don't you think both she and Crew Jones, and the Reynolds twins for that matter, they all looked a little old to be in high school.
Yeah, but see, don't you think that's a thing? When you look back at those movies and people just looked older then in general. I think it had to do with hairstyles for sure, especially on chicks. But people just looked older back then. You look back and it's like, oh, they were 24, but they actually looked 35.
Well, and I bet 9 times out of 10, they actually were older.
They were definitely older. I don't
the only ones 30s that really pulled, like the Coreys pulled it off. They were legit teenagers. Like License to Drive, those guys were actual like high school age, which that movie rules, by the way.
Yeah, License to Drive.
Great. Who played Mercedes Lane? Roller Girl.
Heather Graham.
Yeah, Heather Graham.
Yeah.
Dear Lord.
But the best character in the whole movie is the driving instructor for sure. The Cup. was empty.
Okay, Anderson. Yeah. You burn me, you fail.
I want you to parallel park right here, Anderson.
I love when at the end, when he goes, the cup was empty. Then he goes, see you on the battlefield, soldier.
That's a great line.
He's just talking about driving like out on the road. And he says, see you on the battlefield.
That's probably the line of the movie right there. You're totally right. Yeah.
It's so good. Well, speaking of hot, 80s gals, I think that's a segue to it, dude. It's so hard to know where to start on this album and on this band. And, this was really kind of the midpoint for this band. So a lot of people think of Inxs as a group that, obviously came to mostly US recognition with tonight's record, which was their sixth album, so this is a band that had been at it for a while. But for all intents and purposes, took them a while to kind of get where we're talking about today. But hey,
T, if you don't mind, I have a place to start.
Sure.
Okay. So
Lord knows I've hijacked plenty of your show. So go ahead.
Well, speaking of 80s movies, I just wanted to say that, some of the boys and I, we got together and chipped in and bought you this gift.
Got you this gift. Yeah.
So I have a gift to present to you right now.
Really?
Yeah. I have a musical gift for you.
Okay. Oh, is this a record that you have like 8 copies of and you're going to give me one of your dupes?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. This will definitely not be a dupe because I'd love to keep this item.
All right.
But it is from record shopping. And I came across what is definitely now a highly collectible item.
Oh.
And I just thought you would like it because you've got your setup. We talked about your albums of the year behind you, and you've got a lot of other kind of musical tchotchkes and things like that.
Yeah.
So, but what I found for you, what I bought for you, is a sealed, brand new copy of the original Digipack release of Welcome Wherever You Are. So you can see it's got the hype sticker on it.
That is fantastic. Yeah.
It's never been opened. And
Thank you, man.
You can have this in its total original form.
That is super cool. And it's very, thank you, by the way. And that is interesting that you bring that record up. We're going to talk about that record a little bit.
I knew we would. Yeah.
Because, we'll get to it.
And for people who don't know, this was a very, very limited run of what they called eco packs, not digipacks, but eco packs
or eco pack. Yeah. That's
and
right.
The idea was that, remember how CDs originally came in that big long box? Now they call them long boxes, but it was a long cardboard box. CD was at the bottom of it. And the cardboard box had all this graphics and things on it. Well, they wanted to keep the same orientation, but they decided that they'd turn the CD packaging into the long box. Right. Now, this did not last long at all. In fact, I think there's only a couple albums I don't know of that actually had the Eco Pack packaging. Yeah. But basically, it's the outside packaging, and then it folds into what becomes sort of a digipack.
Honestly, like when I think of that album, I always think of the Eco Pack, right? Like the cover, the folding thing. It's like, it's certainly one of those where before the songs, before even the artwork itself, I always think of the packaging, which is, kind of weird and funny.
It's a real timepiece. It is. And when I saw it, I was like, Toph would really want this.
Yeah. Well, hey, we can talk about if not only have you had any good sounding albums of recent, but hey, let's talk about the packaging of them as well as we go round and round. Come on. Nubs, what are your 3 LPs that you've been absorbing? And also, do you have any, notes or elements of interest tied to the packaging? Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, it's funny because I know deep down you hate when I talk about packaging.
No, I don't. I'm just as much of a kind of nerd about that stuff as you are, really.
Yeah.
The only thing I don't like is when you, instead of saying cover of an album, sometimes you say sleeve. And it's
that's what it is. That's what it is.
It's like a cover's a cover, a sleeve's a sleeve. I don't think those two things are the same.
A cover only refers to the front. The sleeve, it's the front and the back, right?
Maybe episode 70 we hash this out. Anyway, go ahead, buddy. What's round and round?
So, what's honestly, dude, what's been round and round a lot for me lately is a band that we've referenced on the podcast more times than I ever thought we would. which is hilarious. And that is the band Puddle of Mud. I think it's like 4 or 5 episodes that we've referenced this group.
We have. It's weirdly, right?
Yeah. And really both of their albums that were released sort of in their heyday, which is Come Clean and Life on Display. I love both of these albums so much. Maybe it's become like a guilty pleasure, but Come Clean, of course, had, the lead single on it, which people compared to Nirvana, which I will never understand, but the lead single Control. And that was the whole thing with I Like the Way You Smack My Ass. That was kind of why that became popular, which is hilarious because like listening to a dude talk about he likes the way someone smacks his ass is not the most appetizing.
I forgot about that song. Yeah.
But that was actually the lead single. And then Blurry was like the smash it, Can You Take It All Away? That whole thing.
That song's awesome.
Blurry is fabulous.
Yeah, it's really
But
good.
the best song on the record is Drift and Die, the second track. And that's one that I've been listening to a lot. And then the third would be a kind of obscure album, but by a band that I've always really liked, which is Prong. And that is Scorpio Rising. Once again, from 2003. I do feel like I'm doing this early 2000s nostalgia thing. A lot of good hard rock music and metal music from that era. And that Prong album is something that I never heard before. I found a copy on CD and bought it. And like all Prong things, it's very good. It's very headbanging, if you will. Snap your fingers, snap your neck, which you can do while you listen to Prong.
Mm-hmm.
As they instructed. So that's it, man. 2 Puddle of Mud albums and a Prong album. So
well, you doubled up on those guys, huh?
I did. I indeed did. So T, what is round and round for you?
I got new stuff. The first is this really cool band that just came out, and they're called Duran Duran.
Never heard of them.
Yeah, Future Past. So I haven't heard it. I just got it today. Actually, I haven't heard any of these 3 yet, but I'm planning for them to go around.
Oh, this is like a presumptive round and round.
Yeah, this is like a upcoming weekend round and round deal.
I heard the single, the first single off the Duran record.
Yeah, and
it is really good.
Oh, good.
Yeah, really good.
Well, they're newer, and when I say that, I mean like last 10 years stuff has been pretty good. I mean, these guys still know what they're doing, right?
Yeah, I remember you liked Astronaut a lot. You liked that album. I didn't really like Red Carpet Massacre. I thought that was kind of
cool. It wasn't great, but the what was the other? All You Need Is Now was like amazing.
Yeah, you really like that one too.
Good Lord, yeah. The second is your favorite band, My Morning Jacket. Again, haven't heard it. It's self-titled. And it's probably going to be really boring. But
self-titled, that means like, oh, we've restarted. We've rediscovered our roots.
Yeah. Well, I have low expectations, but My Morning Jacket. The third is a great band I've talked about on here before. I'm not sure if you're going to check them out yet, Nubs, but this is Biffy Clyro, the Scottish prog pop, I guess, outfit. This record is called The Myth of the Happily Ever After. Not a very uplifting title, is it? But looking forward to, those guys. It's great. They're so unique and often complex and proggy that it's fun to kind of see what direction they're going. They're almost like another band I love called Everything that just is sort of experimental, and you never know what they're going to bring. So looking forward to that. You can kind of see this coming when you kind of revisit how we got to this smash record. And this was a big deal from a band that had been around for a while, but had really kind of spent its first 5 records sort of figuring out what they wanted to be when they grew up, and there's a lot of themes to this. We're going to talk about the guy behind the guy a little bit. What do you think of when I say guy behind the guy? I think of Swingers.
Honestly, dude, I'm just so excited to talk about Michael Hutchence. So when you say guy behind the guy, all I'm thinking about is like him, looking so beautiful. And he's like one of my all-time man crushes.
Well, I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about the guy behind him. Talking about the guy behind the guy that really made the magic happen.
So it'll be a good debate because I have a thought on who that is on this record, and it might not be who you're thinking, but I just can't wait to talk about Michael Hutchence.
Well,
this has given me an excuse to go back and watch. It's just so sad because, he died so young. But I just really love him.
Yeah, he was really something. He was something.
How lucky are we? We'll get into one of the stories.
Yeah.
That we got to see him in all of his glory.
Very much so. You had very sexy music being sung by an extremely sexy frontman that was written by probably the most unsexy man I've ever seen in my life.
It's an amazing call. You're totally right.
Right?
You're totally right.
But this guy was really the king of the lick at this point, the king of the riff and the progression. I mean, clearly he was onto something here. You've got the most compressed guitars you've ever heard in your life. That'll be interesting. I mean, when these guys play live, it's almost comedic, the tone, but it's so distinctive and it's so perfect for what it does. This clean, compressed tone.
I thought for years that Live Baby Live was just all overdubbed, and it's not.
Yeah.
But you're right, man. It's like so pristine. It almost sounds fake.
I didn't figure it out until like 2 years ago. Live Baby Live also reads as Live Baby Live, which is obviously the first line of track 2 in this record, right?
When did you figure that out?
But like recently, like not that long ago, like 20 years after the thing came out. Right. So,
okay. That makes one of us.
More than 20 years.
Yeah.
So, sorry. You're smarter than I am. You got to talk about the producer.
Yeah.
You got to talk about the manager. I mean, there's a lot to this, but let's start by digging into this thing with those nerdy dates. Let's go.
You want some dirty deeds? Yeah. You want some dirty deeds?
All right. Inxs Kick. Sometimes you kick. Sometimes you get kicked. Was released on October 12th, 1987. So, hey, this thing just celebrated its 34th birthday, if I'm not mistaken, right? Am I doing the math right? Carry the 2. So next year, this thing will turn 35. It was their 6th album. Inxs was sort of coming off of really its entry point into the U.S. with a record called Listen Like Thieves, which had sort of their breakthrough single, certainly in the U.S.
I would say 2 breakthrough singles, What You Need and the title track, were both relatively successful. But What You Need, I think, was the one, right? I mean,
yeah. And this time was a pretty decent, hit too. So these guys had certainly, gotten their foot in the door with the US audience. And it's one of those deals where, they were kind of fixing to explode. A lot of people could sense that, but not everyone was a believer during the development of Kick, and we'll get to it. It was nominated for the Grammy. They lost to U2, because who didn't at that time? But for Best Rock Performance, Grammys are so stupid. There's Best Album, there's Best Song, and then there's like this Best Performance thing. It's like, what does that mean? And then I guess it could be a song or an album is like kind of dumb, But
yeah, proof that the Grammys were just as up its own ass in 1987 as it is now, right?
Yeah.
So who should pay attention? Who cares?
Yeah, kind of weird.
The thing too is the song of the year and then the record of the year. Like it took me a long time to figure that one out.
Exactly. Like it's so dumb. This had 4 top 5 singles. Obviously some, iconic tunes here from the mid 80s as it was. Inxs was a weird band early on. It's probably, there are a lot of bands like this where you kind of listen to their breakthrough record and then you go back and like check out the early stuff. And it's just like, are these even the same guys? Because everything was different. I mean, the musicality was different. The instrumentation was different. Even Hutchence's vocals were pretty different. They were sort of a new wave ska kind of thing. It was a weird, unique, very Australian-ish, kind of hodgepodge of some kind of weird blend between like Men at Work and sort of the English pop new wave thing, sort of all mashed together. It was very it's fairly schizophrenic. It was a band that you could tell wasn't quite sure what it was trying to do just yet. And every album, they seem to evolve and get closer and closer to a distinctive sound, and a sound that was more and more radio friendly, and a sound that was more and more breakthrough, and obviously Kick was really the pinnacle of that. But you could kind of see this coming, certainly from the couple of albums before this, but it's a band that's always kind of funny to go back and listen to their really early work, because it's sort of strange if you really go back and dig through it.
What's interesting, T, is the description you just gave describes a few other bands for sure. And the two that come to mind, the first one you've already mentioned once, U2. Go back and listen to those early U2 albums. It sounds nothing like what that band became. I think a lot of that was they just weren't very good, just as players of their respective instruments. And they had to really develop, and they did develop their sound, but it took them some time. The other peer of Inxs that I think really follows the same model is Simple Minds. Now, I love the first couple Simple Minds albums, but they're very, very different. They're very jangly. They're very new wavy.
Yeah.
And then they developed into much more of a polished sound. And again, producers had a lot to do with that and started making, hit songs. And those are just two examples. I think there's many others, particularly in the 80s. It's a different era. Like, people were just not like amazing at their instruments just to start like they are nowadays,
Right.
With School of Rocks and all these sort of resources, and kids buying instruments a lot younger, and instruments being much, much more affordable now than they used to be. The development of a musician now happens much earlier than it did then.
It's all fantastic points. And the other thing is that bands didn't sort of have to be great right away.
Correct.
They could sort of, get a record deal, develop a little bit of a following, play some live shows, open for some bigger bands. You didn't have to like come on right away and sort of prove instant commercial success in order to sort of have a secure progression and evolution into kind of your band working on its craft and improving. And, these were days where, to your point, I think those are great examples where bands really had the ability to kind of do that.
Not everyone can be Puddle of Mud, just come out in their first album and just crush it.
Just be amazing right away. Yeah, it's true.
It's actually an interesting example. We just continue to talk about Puddle of Mud.
But, now we're doing the, I think we're going to have to find a way to weave Puddle of Mud into every episode.
Absolutely. But to your point, a lot of this was business aspects too. There were much fewer record labels back then, and labels would take the time and the energy and the relationships to build investment in their artists. A band like Puddle of Mud signed to Fred Durst's label, who like 2 years before had become a star. So of course he gets his own label, and before you know it, hit song all over the place. So it was a totally different process back then, and one that is more interesting without question to follow. And those early Inxs albums, while they're not my favorites by any means, they do help tell the story. You can kind of follow this band's progression from the start.
Yeah, they sure do. There was one guy, part of this project, though, that did start extremely hot. So kind of did the opposite. There was no evolving here, and that is Chris Thomas, the producer. So the first two records that Chris Thomas worked on, now pay attention now, Nub. The first record was called The Beatles, otherwise known as the White Album. And the second was another one called Abbey Road by the same band, right? By the same band. So he wasn't credited with a production credit, but was involved in co-production with this guy named George Martin, who also produced a few albums in his day, and was heavily involved in mixing. Now, if I didn't get you on the last one, I'm going to get you on this one, buddy. He proceeded to work with this band you may have also heard of called Roxy Music, and this artist called Brian Ferry on several projects. He mixed this album called Dark Side of the Moon in 1973. Should I go on? Do I need to keep going?
No, I remember earlier when you asked about the guy behind the guy. This was who I was talking about. Chris Thomas is so vital to this album.
Yeah, it's true. And he's one of the guys behind the guy, right? So I guess there are two, and then he, obviously started with this band Inxs with the aforementioned Listen Like Thieves record, which certainly was their entry point into this American audience. So they were able to partner with a guy who knew exactly what he was doing in a studio environment, but clearly had proven the chops to be able to produce something that is not only a bit more modern at this time, but a bit more forward thinking and front footed at this time. Some of the sounds that Inxs was proposing via instrumentation, via beat, I mean, they were actually concerned this would be tough on the radio because it had so much like sort of R&B and groove mixed with pop, mixed with rock. You know, the famously the Atlantic executive, the first time he heard Kick, said that he would pay Chris Murphy, who's the manager of the band, he would pay him $1 million to scrap Kick and go back and write a new album. And Chris Murphy kind of figured out, because he believed in it so much, and thank goodness he did, to get this thing through the red tape. But Chris Thomas, the producer, certainly had an ability to take these songs that certainly foundationally were pretty special, but man, did he bring them to life and create a sound and an ambience that was great for radio and was really something that in a lot of ways pop rock fans in 1987 hadn't heard much of before.
He did a lot of things technically to support the album. His credentials prove that. But the intangible that he brought to this band was confidence, and they needed that. And Michael Hutchence talks about that. If you watch some interviews with Hutchence talking about Kick, which I highly recommend because then you can gaze into those beautiful eyes and that exquisite hair of his. My God, he had great hair.
Great hair.
He talks about that the band came in with a ton of energy and enhanced confidence. And Chris Thomas, it doesn't take long for that name to come up. So a good producer, like a good head coach, knows how to draw up the X's and O's, but most importantly, gives his artists confidence, allows them to play with a bit of swagger, which, my goodness, does this album have a lot of swagger to it, and to be your very best at every moment of the process. And what you're hearing here is tremendous production from a technical perspective, but you're hearing a band that's at its most confident without question. And that goes a long way, man.
Nubs, hearing you talk about Hutchence, are you sweating over there? I think I see a bead of sort of glaze. You okay? Or?
Profusely.
Yeah. Well, you're not the only one. Let me tell you something.
Can we talk about packaging yet? I've got
on Kick.
Yeah, on Kick. Sure. You said you want to hear some packaging. I got the vinyl copy of Kick.
Yeah.
Have you ever looked at the inside of the gatefold?
I have not. Ooh, that's super cool.
Isn't it cool? So it's got Kick in big letters, Kick with the I black and the other letters red. But then what do you see on the side there? A very sexy sort of side image of Mr. Hutchence. But it's a strange sleeve, isn't it? It's got these weird pictures of skateboard shoes and a hand, and I'm not sure what they were going for, but what does stand out is the logo. And what's very clever is just the INXS, the stars, and then KICK. I remember that as a kid, just thinking that was cool.
Yes.
Very that resonated. Cool,
yeah. Very cool branding, very cool kind of attitude through the artwork and the white background too, right? I mean, this was sort of, everything was kind of floating, and it was neat. It was neat visually. So, why don't we talk about your boyfriend for a minute? And, this band was formed in 1977, and appropriately they were called the Ferris Brothers, because this band is made up of a bunch of brothers. Okay. You got three of them. So essentially, besides Hutchence, you had a guy who played some guitar and sax, which obviously is a very important piece of this sound, on all Inxs records, but certainly Kick. And then you had Jerry Gary Beers, who played bass, who, word has it, they only had him join the band because he owned a van. But other than that, those two guys and Michael Hutchence, you had three brothers, multi-instrument players here. You had John, who played drums and percussion and backing vocals and some keyboard stuff. You had Tim, who played a little bit of everything. And then, of course, the real guy behind the guy in this band, which is Andrew Ferris. And Andrew played everything, some percussion, some background vocals, some piano, some guitar, some keyboards, some harmonica. On stage, he was typically playing keyboards, but the brothers, particularly Andrew and Tim, kind of swapped around on a lot of instruments. It was part of the fun of watching this band live is, those three brothers, while, generally John stays on drums, you can tell that these guys are really quality musicians and can play a lot of different things. But when it comes to the composition of not just Kick, but, primarily most of Inxs's material musically, Andrew Ferris is really the one that deserves that credit. The true guy behind the guy of this band. It's so notorious, Nub, this sort of storyline of bands that are made up of brothers and how much trouble that usually causes. You look at Black Crowes and Oasis and Space Hog and, several others where, you got brothers in bands and it ends up being the downfall. This band was like the opposite. The brothers were freaking fine. It was their, front man that kind of caused a lot of the drama and a lot of the issues, particularly, as things got sort of later in their career. But it's very interesting, I think, dynamic here. And it's sort of part of that Australian thing. And, these were pretty laid back guys and pretty humble guys really until, things sort of blew up and went a little crazy here in the late 80s and beyond. But, the brothers were never the problem in this band, Nub. But boy, you can really sense the chemistry between those guys. And then you pair them with a vocalist like Hutchence and it all kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. The Ferris brothers are the engine of Inxs. They are musically, composition, all the examples of kind of what we've already talked about with just the unique playing styles. Michael Hutchence was the 80s version of Jim Morrison. He kind of looked like him and his presence was very similar to Morrison's. Maybe he wasn't quite as like criminally edgy as Jim Morrison was, but he was such a Jim Morrison disciple in the way that his charisma, his voice, he almost crooned a little bit like Morrison. He had these stunning good looks and he was, the women loved him and the guys wanted to sort of be him. And he also kind of wreaked havoc on his band, just like Jim Morrison did. I mean, so the parallels are all over the place.
Boy, both looked really good in a set of leather trousers, didn't they?
Yeah. And without a shirt on. I'm not sure I don't have great imagery of either one of these guys with shirts on.
Who looks better shirtless and with leather pants? Michael Hutchence or Jim Morrison? Go. Who is it, Nub?
I'm going to say Michael Hutchence. But Jim Morrison, he looked damn good too. Shirtless and leather pants.
That's tough. Yeah. I think it's a tie. I can't really, I don't know. Both are so dreamy,
Yeah. So it's always been kind of a thing that I've connected to Inxs is he was kind of the 80s Jim Morrison, the Ferris brothers. I am intrigued by the fact that they're brothers who really got along well because you're right, that usually goes sideways in a band. It's almost like that battle between who's irreplaceable. If you took Hutchence out of Inxs, you have basically what you've had the last 20 plus years, which is strong songs sung by people who are capable. If you take the Ferris brothers out of Inxs, you lose pretty much all of it, So they were very codependent, and that's what happens in great bands.
Yeah, great point. And Michael Hutchence died November 22nd, 1997. One of the certainly more notorious and certainly more, saddening rock star, deaths. His death was not through autoerotic asphyxiation, which was a big sort of wise tale within the music community and the media for a long time. It was by suicide, and Hutchence was in a really bad place, and this has been documented through some recent documentaries, as well as that goofy Inxs movie. Was that on VH1 or something? Which, is actually pretty good. It's two parts and it takes you through their whole start to finish. And, the actors do a good job. It's not easy doing that, right? I mean, making sort of a dramatization of a band is never terribly easy, but I actually think they did a pretty good job with it. Hutchence as a personality, as a front man, he's an Aussie who liked to party, liked to dig into the indulgences, certainly, of rock and roll at the time, but was also, to your earlier point, a very sweet, rather soft-spoken Aussie who I think just kind of got caught up in a little too much and started to kind of pile a few too many blocks on top of themselves. And eventually it was, probably going to topple over in some way or another. Definitely caused a lot of drama and problems for his band, although they always sort of found a way to plow through, and certainly got himself into a very sort of odd, toxic relationship with one Paula Yates, who is a British, I guess she was sort of a media personality, rock journalist, kind of a type of person. There's this famous, she had this show called The Big Breakfast, and she would interview rock stars on her bed. And there's this extremely famous interview with Michael Hutchence. This was before they were technically publicly dating, but apparently they had already been having an affair, because Paula was married to Bob Geldof, and they had children, and, it was a whole family situation. And Hutchence, I think, had a girlfriend, but you watch this interview and it's like, they're like snuggled up and like they're acting like they've known each other for years, which they perhaps had. And then, of course, months later, she divorces Bob Geldof and he leaves whoever he was with, probably more than one. And they end up a thing. They have a daughter. There you go. But it was a bad situation, right? And there were issues with, Paula being able to bring their daughter, who was named Tiger, to Australia, and drama between Michael Hutchence and Geldof, and the whole situation that just seemed very toxic and very ugly, and put Hutchence in a bad place. And you mix that with a lot of substance abuse, and, which included, alcohol, cocaine, pills. These are all things that were found in his system when he died. It just seems like a guy that was in a pretty, dark place. And boy, it's always sad for, when you think about the remaining band members, and we've talked about this with a few other examples, and crews, and, this was a global brand and a global outfit here. And obviously, you have so many people affected, but it's always pretty amazing when you look at these stories and realize, the amount of pain a guy like him must have been in. It just seemed like a spiral with him that eventually, probably inevitably in the views of many, sort of met its end. But one of the sad ones, Nubs, certainly, as far as rock stars disappearing quicker than they should have, right?
For sure, man. And I know our Wonder Stories are going to touch on some personal experiences that we had.
Indeed. Let's do it. Wonder Stories. Nub, there are a few shows. Obviously we've been to a lot of great ones, but man, there are a handful where you look back and it's like, thank God, and I'm sure we're about to talk about one, but what's your Wonder Story, bud?
Yeah. We'll talk about two, because it's almost bookends of experiences like that. So in terms of discovering Inxs, I mean, it's common story, as we've told before. I think a lot of it comes back to our mom, who had great music taste and raised us right musically. She was very into Inxs. I think she was very into Michael Hutchence too. She didn't have a poster of him on her wall like she did of Rick Springfield and Kip Winger. We were 7 years old when Kit came out. I remember, a little bit of What You Need, just because it was such an identifiable riff and song. But this album was monumental for kids who grew up in the 80s. The Devil Inside video and the song, that was a very edgy single for its time. But I remember more than anything, probably Need You Tonight Mediate, the video, right? With the cards mocking the Bob Dylan video from back in the 60s. And there was something about that was just so incredibly cool. Growing up, that was a big deal. But we actually, we didn't get to see Inxs until years later. I think I'll let you tell the story of the first show because it's a little bit more in your wheelhouse, the tour that we saw and just the way that whole experience came together. I want to talk more about the last time that we saw Inxs. And this was in 1997. This was just a few months before Michael Hutchence died. It's one of the things that made that death when we were 17 years old really hit home because it was like, wow, I just saw this guy perform. And it was on the Elegantly Wasted tour. And by this time, Inxs was more of like a standard, to your point earlier. They were not a hot band and they were doing, festival circuits and in our case, radio station circuits. So these radio stations at the time, which had gained tremendous power in the music industry, were putting on these like festivals. So it was like a station festival. And Inxs was one of the headliners at a rather large venue, Pine Dot Music Theater in Metro Detroit. And, we went because of a lot of other bands, but seeing Inxs at this time would have been very cool. Not as exciting as the first time we saw them. And they came out and were great in that sort of, elder statesman kind of way. And Michael Hutchence still owned the stage and looked great and sounded amazing. And, it was a very, very good night. You left going, man, Inxs is still really, really good. Almost felt legacy. Almost felt a little nostalgic in a way. This is 10 years after Kick came out. I just remember thinking, wow, he still can really own a stage and command an audience. And good thing we were there because just a few short months later, he was gone. And his death certainly came as a shock at 17. It was a big deal.
Well, and when the first time we saw them was when the Catherine Wheel opened, right?
That's right. Exactly.
At the big arena, which was, when we went to the Elegantly Wasted show, it was outside and it was kind of, to your point, end of the night headliner. It was probably one of the most energetic atmospheres I've ever been to at a concert. I mean, it was very special and, loved the band, but wasn't like a super fan, right? It was kind of like, this will be cool. We'll get to see these guys. And I just remember being like, legitimately blown away by their energy live, by the way they played. Instrumentation was so tight and it was just like everything worked. And, it's sad to look back now and realize that, boy, we saw him. He was probably not in a very good place, but you'd never know when he got out there. I mean, he was seemingly enjoying it. He was spinning around, doing all of his, all of his moves and, it was special. And of course, seeing him the first time, the Catherine Wheel open, good Lord, what a show.
I don't know if you remember the details of that, but again, our mom was taking us to concerts. She was thoroughly convinced that the best way to go to a concert was to not buy tickets in advance. You would go and you would buy them in the parking lot. And this is sort of between when that was running rampant and when you could like go to jail for it. It was sort of that like, you can do it, just be smart about it. Pay with cash. Don't be stupid. Like,
yeah, they didn't have StubHub back then, right?
Correct. And so we didn't have tickets. We bought them in the parking lot. And as it turns out, we got these amazing seats. We ended up like 20th row on the floor.
Yeah, we did.
And Catherine Wheel opened up. And that's when you fell in love with the Catherine Wheel.
Oh my God. I was like, who are these guys? They're so good.
Remember they played Black Metallic last and we were just stunned.
We were drooling.
Stunned. Yeah.
It's like, wait, we get to see another band after that? Like,
that was the sentiment. You just nailed it. It was like, we were totally, so overwhelmed by the magnificence of the Catherine Wheel.
Yeah.
And then it was like, holy crap. Now we get to see Inxs.
I know.
And they came out and just Michael Hutchence was right off the bat was just incredible.
Yeah.
It was just awesome.
Hell of a show. Palace of Auburn Hills, right? Hey, while we're at it, let's do a top 5. I think this is a good band to throw one out there, and then obviously we'll dig into the record. But these guys go a long way back. I'll be interested to see how deep in your catalog you want to go. But how do you feel? You want to do it?
Yeah, I think this is going to be really difficult, but let's do it. Yeah, I got to tell you.
I got to say that, I kind of thought through mine a little bit. And at first it was like, this is tough. But then honestly, like, it was like a flood. Like all of a sudden it was just, I wrote down the 5 and it was like, oh yeah, of course those are the 5. Right. So, yeah. Well, let's start with you, but are you going to go in order? Or are you just going to throw the 5 out there?
I actually can. I think I'm able to put them in order.
All right. Well, you can put them in order-ish if you want, but why don't you kick it off? What's your first one?
Yeah, I will kick it off, and I'm going to go with for number 5, the title track off of the album that came before Kick, which is the song "Listen Like Thieves" off of "Listen Like Thieves." Oh. Very, very well constructed song, catchy, a perfect capture of its time. It just sounds like something from the mid '80s that would sound wonderful on the radio. Hutchence' voice is really coming into its own at this point, and it's got that jangly, guitar thing going on, and that became the signature sound. So number 5 for me, T, is "Listen Like Thieves." What's your number 5?
My number 5, New Blaze, is off tonight's album, and it's "Never Tear Us Apart." So we'll get to it.
Really? I would have never guessed that was on your list.
What's your next one?
T, number 4 for me is off of the album Full Moon Dirty Hearts, the show that we saw the tour of. And it is the song "The Gift," which was the first single off of that. Just a big, huge drum sound.
Yeah.
Loud guitars. I know that Full Moon Dirty Hearts is like this heavy album. It's just got this gigantic sound, more so than anything else they did. And I think it's the band trying to be a little bit of a hard rock is a little heavy, but it's grunge. In 1993, they're buying into that. And "The Gift" is this huge song. T, what's your number 4?
All right. You ready? Now pay attention here. All right. Number 4 for me is "Heaven Sent" off of Welcome to Wherever You Are.
I would have predicted that was your second or first, to be honest.
Track 2.
Yeah.
Just a freaking jam. It's so driving. It's so good. And the distorted vocal too, right? That was still at this time something you didn't expect to hear from a band like this. And what a great effect. Very well produced song.
Want to hear another tidbit about that song?
Sure.
One of the first songs you ever learned on guitar.
Oh, you're right. I think I played it incorrectly, but nonetheless,
you played it incorrectly and nonstop, but we're going to count it as you learning it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. What's your next one, buddy?
Next one is off of tonight's album. This was a rather easy one. Placement was a little tough, and that is number 3, "New Sensation."
Oh, okay.
Second track off of Kick. Number 3, "New Sensation." What's your number 3?
My number 3 is track 3 on Welcome to Wherever You Are, deep cut, called "Communication."
Oh, that's in my next 5. I will have to go through our next 5. Yeah, it's I know, right?
Jam, just a freaking jam. That I'll tell you, the front half of that record. I mean, really the first 8 tracks of that record. Boy, that's something.
That song is relentless. The way it builds, it just builds and builds. I love it.
The drum beat and everything. I mean, that's
a great choice, man. That is.
But what do you got next?
Number 2 is, in my opinion, easily the most underrated song in the Inxs catalog. It's one of the most kind of overlooked songs from the era. And that is the closing track off of X, a song called "Hear That Sound."
Oh, okay.
Beautiful, beautiful song, just with this like guiding keyboard melody. And again, it's got a key change that really works and very inspirational sound. It's an awesome closer to a fairly underrated album, I would say, overall with X. T, what's your numero dos?
My numero dos is track 4 on Welcome to Wherever You Are, and that is "Taste It." And this 3-song run, which obviously is what I basically just did, of "Heaven Sent," "Communication," and "Taste It" is just blistering. I mean, it's like, anybody thought that these guys were sort of cooling off, because this was the record after X, they were mistaken, because this is like as blazing as this band got. And, they go on to show some dynamics for the remainder of that record and some kind of more ballady stuff with some kind of neat instrumentation and showing kind of a sweeter side to the group, but then that trio right there of jams is tough to beat. So Taste It is number 2. Nub, what is your number 1 from the great Inxs?
My number 1 was very easy. It's super easy choice. This was easier than all the other 4 and all the other ones that didn't make the top 5. And that is the second track and the title track off of the last album with Michael Hutchence. The song "Elegantly Wasted."
Yeah, you love
"Elegantly
that one.
Wasted."
You've from the moment that song was released, you've been a huge fan of it. That's great. That's great.
It's such a clever melody that he sings over the verse, and then this big sort of stadium chorus, and the song just never quits. I mean, I can't remember how long it is, but it just never ends. It's probably only 5 minutes long or so, but it's just got this unbelievable pace to it. It's got a nice climax at the end in the background vocals too. You know, all the Ferris guys and everybody singing those background vocals. Very, important part of the sound. So
they could really blend vocals well, and not surprising because all 3 brothers sang, background, but their background vocals, you could really get a sense for it live. Were pretty important to this band. Hutchence gets a lot of vocal credit and should, but yeah, those guys were important.
And that song was a showstopper at that show that we saw in 97. All right. Which song off Welcome to Wherever You Are tops your list? Actually, I don't think my prediction is this. It's a song off X.
Who's the guy in the old political show that used to say wrong?
Oh yeah. It was like
McLaughlin?
an McLaughlin group.
Yeah,
the McLaughlin group. Yeah.
Wrong. That was a great Dana Carvey bit.
Yeah,
right? Yeah, wrong again there, Nub. But I mean, I understand why you'd think that because there are a couple other dandies. But this is not a difficult choice for me. And really, the tough part is deciding, do I like the Live Baby Live or the version on the album X? And they're both incredible, so it's hard to pick. That would be the only difficult decision. As far as, my top 1 favorite Inxs song, it is The Stairs, track 3 on X, which is, it is an incredible song. I love the way it builds, that sort of cadence of it, and that really, really strong backbeat that they generated. And hey, that was another Chris Thomas produced effort there on X. So perfect combination of composition, vocal, instrumentation, and production, which certainly I think the band found on that great track 3 off X, The Stairs. And certainly they found a few times on Kick. What do you say we kick into it, Nub?
Let's kick it.
All right, Nub. Let's get some honesty going here. All right, let's get some real talk. You ready? Do you flip this song?
Yes. Well, I like it for about a minute, but yeah, then it's like a halfway through the song flip. I'll explain my take on the opening track. It's a very interesting opener, isn't it?
Interesting is certainly a word for it. Guns in the Sky.
I'm sick of it. It's a load of shit. We can stop the world and let off our fools and let them go live with the guns in the sky.
So, obviously I'll turn it over to you for your theory, that you already teased us with. But I mean, to me, it serves as much of an intro as it does a song, because it's got that pretty steady cadence and certainly fairly repetitive from a riff standpoint. But that's the way I have always kind of looked at Guns in the Sky, is that it's really just a table setter, more so than an actual song, but never a great sign for a record when you're inclined to flip track 1, when track 1 actually does have music. So what do you think? What's your theory on it?
So I agree with all that. It's a James Brown homage, in my opinion. It sounds like something that James Brown would do with this repetition and then this kind of freewheeling vocal over the top of it. I think this band was like so influenced by funk, and I think they saw this as that, lay a bed down with this big groove. I do like the riff. I think the riff is cool. there's a lot of things they could have done with this to make for a much better opening track. But I agree with you. I think it's a mood setter more than anything else. But musically, in terms of the song, it's like a funk song. It's just relentless. And then he's basically doing a James Brown impression over the top of it with all of the extracurricular activities, you know?
Yeah, that's a good call. I mean, obviously Hutchence and really, I think all the guys, to your point, they were heavily influenced by R&B and funk music and these type of things. And you can certainly get a sense for that. As we mentioned earlier, it was part of the concern from the label was that this thing tried to mix too many genres and tried to incorporate certain things that really weren't on mainstream pop radio from a beat and groove and rhythm standpoint. I mean, much like all of the tracks on Kick, it's exceptionally well produced. So I think it's one of those, it's not like a great song and it's not really a memorable starter. You know, Thompson certainly did a good job making something out of it. And it does serve as an intro to the classic track 2, New Sensation. The trademark so I talked earlier about guitar compression. There's an ultimate example of that. I think that's a heavily compressed, clean tone with, probably a little bit of flanger on it, I would guess, is what kind of creates that wavy sound. It's a great tone. It's a great part. It's a great lick. I know you had this in your top 5, so I'm expecting to hear positive sentiment on the song, but this is a classic from the time period, certainly. And boy, was it a good live song too, huh?
Yeah, as mentioned, the version on Live Baby Live is such a huge opener. You could just imagine Wembley Stadium just going insane. Guns in the Sky doesn't have any compositional fascination. This is like perfect composition. Kind of chugging verses. You've got the drums double up during the chorus, which raises your interest. The background vocals, again, with that call and response thing, works very, very well. New Sensation is, it's basically like a perfect song. Michael Hutchence is dialed in. If the first one is his James Brown thing, this is much more of a pop sensibility, just vocally, and shows his range too. So yeah, perfect Ferris, perfect Hutchence. New Sensation's a keeper for sure.
Track 3 is incredibly important to the entry point of this record, particularly in the US. This was, I believe it was the most successful song in the US. A very memorable video, which was directed by Joel Schumacher, actually. And Kirk Pengilly, the sax player, said that he did not like the video because he thought it was, quote, too American. So you got Joel Schumacher to direct the damn thing. It's going to be pretty Americana, don't you
what
think?
Do you expect? Yeah, exactly.
But this one, Chris Murphy famously, shopped this song to college radio before the drop of the album and sort of did that as part of this whole self-funded effort to really, he really believed in this song and wisely developed a nice sort of niche college audience with this track, which really helped push this band beyond just what they had done with their previous single off their previous album and really let a new audience for these guys, a younger audience, know that these guys had come on with something very new and very different and very sexy, right? With Devil Inside.
Look at the faces, listen to the bells. It's hard to believe we need a place called hell. Place called hell. The devil inside, every single one.
Now, it's a song where everything kind of fell perfectly, right? I mean, you've got a riff that's undeniable. And Andrew Ferris, proves time and time again on this record that the riffs and licks are just unstoppable. Now, they're pretty simple. There's nothing in terms of complex musicianship here. There's nothing that, frankly, in some cases probably hadn't done in some stylistic capacity before. But the way they were able to establish groove and beats, and then obviously Hutchence nails it both lyrically and vocal line wise. That
like
whole
full Jim Morrison here.
Exactly.
Like complete.
And that whole outro, the dun, 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 is musically so good and just so rich. Everything works. It's probably the most perfectly constructed and perfectly produced song on the record. I feel like Devil Inside, just everything works. Boy, you must have gotten, 3 tracks into this thing and thought, boy, these guys really did something good here.
Yeah, it's great composition. I think that driving beat gave it its pop sensibility. Obviously, the riff is really catchy too. I mean, it's almost like one of those songs where it feels like there was a lot of thought put into it, but also not a lot of thought put into it. There's a spontaneity to it, yet it's so well constructed that obviously there was some carefulness to the crafting of it. So you got to love it.
I agree with that. I think that's a good take. And man, there are some good electro beats on this thing too. Right. And again, that was something that was pretty unique at the time in terms of taking a guitar band, and a band that had been more sort of new wavy in its roots and coming up with these, more sort of static, electronic beats. And that beat that intros the song and sort of takes you throughout really is just iconic. I mean, it's really, really good. The next one, I guess, isn't it sort of 2 songs? I mean, I know in the video they sort of mashed them together. Is it 2 songs? Is it 1 song?
I think we should do it as one because the video is really the imagery of the song really comes in the video. And that was 1. So I always counted it as 1.
All right. Well, shucks. Let's play them one after the other then, and then we'll get your take. This is Need You Tonight, which goes into Mediate, or is it Meditate? I don't know. That's up for debate. Hey-oh.
All we've got is this moment. 21st century is yesterday. To liberate, fascinate, enthusiate, and reinstate. Liberate, to liberate.
Cue the saxophone.
Yeah, exactly.
Fake saxophone, is it?
No, I think it's real. I mean, hey, these guys had a dedicated sax player, but like we've said many times, you never really know what's going on in the studio, do you? But my bet would be that having, the acoustic sax of Kirk Pengilly, which obviously was always very critical to the Inxs sound, I would imagine that they had him go ahead and play it.
One of my favorite moments on the album, for sure, is the opening line to Mediate, because you get through Need You Tonight, which is just this like oozing of sexiness song, right? I mean, you can imagine some of the activities in the 80s that maybe had this as a soundtrack, because it really was. It's such a sexy song with this beat and even the guitar lick itself. I mean, that had to be one word.
This and Ragdoll by Aerosmith. Remember the video with the shadows like humping each other?
Yeah, totally.
So, just so weird. So 80s and weird.
So 80s and weird. But Andy Ferris must have written that guitar lick and just been like, oh, that's a hit.
The track listing did list this as Meditate on some pressings and Mediate on some others. So I don't know. I guess we're going with Mediate, but it's kind of weird.
The record I'm holding right now says Mediate, so I'm going to go with that. But yeah, you're right. I called it Meditate here and there.
There's a famous story on this song where Andrew Ferris he was getting into a cab to go meet Michael Hutchence in Hong Kong. If you can imagine the frickin' shenanigans that went down in Hong Kong before Kick. And Andrew Ferris had this beat and this sort of minimalist riff. And he got in the cab and all of a sudden into his head popped, dent, 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 and he actually told the cab driver to hang on. He almost missed his flight, went back into his apartment, laid down the guitar track onto a cassette, grabbed it, ran back into the cab. Cab driver was all pissed off. I guess it took him like 40 minutes. But he had that riff on the cassette tape, and that was part of what he took to Hong Kong and put in front of Michael Hutchence. And then, rather famously, I guess Hutchence came up with the vocal line in 14 minutes. He took the cassette, went into another room, came back with lyrics and a vocal line, and a classic was born. Now, you hear those stories a lot with these type of songs where it's almost seems like the more important the song, oftentimes the shorter time it took to develop. No idea how long this one took to develop because we get to our first sort of deep cut here on Kick with The Loved One. It's pretty good. I think it's, for kind of being the first album track on the thing, and you get all the way obviously to track 6 to get you there. I think for it being the first album track, it holds up pretty nicely. The thing with Inxs, man, is like nothing was ever very tricky or difficult. This is all pretty basic stuff. And in many cases, these are pretty basic rock pop progressions that you hear on Kick. Now, as they got later in their work, they started to do some things that were a little bit more experimental as far as riffs and progressions. And certainly early in their career, they were pretty out there and pretty unique. So this is definitely their most, I suppose their progressions could be described as fairly cookie cutter on this record. But then you layer in the vocals and you layer in the backing vocals, which are a huge part of Kick, the instrumentation, the layering, and certainly the production. And you get these songs that at their essence, if you were hearing somebody play them on an acoustic guitar in a bar, you'd be like, boy, this is very simple. But obviously the sort of richness of it in the way that it was recorded and produced, gives you something that certainly comes across as more dynamic and more thicker, oftentimes when it actually isn't. And I think The Loved One is a good example of that. What do you think of the first album cut on Kick?
I've always really loved this song. It sounded like a hit. But yeah, and I think it's a nice conclusion to side one. I don't typically, we've talked about this before, I don't typically like things in a waltz or songs that have a lot of swing to them. I think it works really, really well here. It's all about the chorus. I think the verse is a little dumpy, but builds to a nice chorus. And again, that waltzy thing really works there. So yeah, I really like The Loved One, man.
Flip the record and it kicks off with Wildlife.
Off in the distance, vibe and bright, make decisions.
So obviously, you get this very distinct Kick sound in terms of drums, in terms of keyboards, in terms of guitars, in terms of what Hutchence is doing. It's a very Kick-like song. That's one of the things that's kind of cool about this record is when you hear a song off of it, even if it's not a well-known song, you can tell that it was on Kick. X took on an even further and even more polished, believe it or not, production sound, which actually brought on a lot of criticism. People thought it was very overproduced. And then sort of their later work went back to being stuff that was a little bit more raw. And obviously their early work was like stripped down new wave. So I think Wildlife's a good example of if you heard it, and even if this wasn't one of your favorite tracks on the record, you pretty much knew that not only was this Inxs, but it probably was on Kick. So it's not my favorite on the record, but I guess it gets side 2 off to a little bit of an energetic start.
I think it's a really solid song. First of all, I love your analysis. I think it's quintessential Kick. All the elements are there. Was never going to be a hit though. There's just so many other songs on here that overshadow it in terms of hit potential, but I like kind of the steadiness of it. Again, it gets back to kind of that bigger groove after The Loved One. So it's an okay start to side 2.
Anytime they had strings on their records, even in their later work, they used full orchestras and recorded with full orchestras. And these sound like keyboards, but who knows? Either way, provides a really stunning backdrop to, one of the better, I'm not even sure if I guess it's sort of a mid-tempo ballad in Never Tear Us Apart.
'Cause we all have wings, but some of us don't know why. I was standing, you were there.
Nubs, do you recall the other album we've done? I think this is within our last 10 episodes or so. That was in 1987. Do you recall which record it was?
Trying to go through the catalog in my head.
Boy, talk about a short-term memory, huh?
Yeah.
It was Faith. And I think that there are some elements here, at least production wise, that are a little Faith-esque, that took on some orchestral sort of feel, but in a pop sense. It's very much a pop song, but has some of this unique instrumentation that I think really took it up a notch. Now, they intended for this to be a piano ballad. I think the idea here was that this would be something that was really stripped down and probably very minimalist and piano driven. Instead, it became strings driven, and probably, a good call, because I think that's really what leads to this song having as much feeling as it does and being as compelling as it is. I like that they don't try to do too much on it. You've got the pauses. It's probably the most stripped down song on the thing. You do have the sax solo and some of those things, but you're really being driven here by drums, strings, and a little bit of a low end. I mean, there's hardly any guitar. You can hear some of that and those type of licks, but it's not really driven by those common instruments that you see throughout Kick. And it's a little bit more stripped down and, I suppose acoustic in its nature, albeit driven by probably a rather sizable collection of orchestration, but beautiful song. It made my top 5. I think it's really an outstanding track from the 80s and probably fairly timeless.
Very interesting. It's the second song and 3 songs in 6/8, because the loved one in this sort of have a similar feel. Again, that waltzy sort of deal. This is a very romantic song. I mean, I'm sure this was many couples, songs with each other in the 80s and things like that. And also you kind of get the first glimpses of Hutchence sort of a desperation. He's not partying on this song. He's really belting it out. He had such range. I mean, he really did. He could croon low and he could sing really high, and you kind of get all that here. So a very important part of Kick for sure.
He may have had a lot of Jim Morrison tendencies, but I think it's fair to say he had a bit more range than Jim Morrison. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah. Morrison's range went from this to about this.
Yeah. And he would just get louder. He couldn't really climb the ladder, so he would just turn up the volume, right?
This City of Night is about as much range as you ever got from Jim.
And he could barely get there. Let's be honest.
It took a lot of Jack Daniels to get him there.
Part 2 of a pretty good 3-song run here. This was a huge hit outside of the U.S. and a pretty big hit in the U.S. Mystify.
Your face, and I will survive. Mystify me.
There's plenty to like here. I think the backing vocals are actually killer. I think that's what really brings it to life and makes it special. You're getting a little formulaic here. And sometimes, Andrew Ferris could be accused of that a little bit in terms of this being, riff based and beat based. And there's a little bit, I understand why it was a single. For me, there's a little bit of okay, I get it, guys, on this, where, it's like, I like the bounce, I like the groove, but there's something about when you get to this point in the record, and I think it's saved a little bit by the next track, which gives you a whole different look at tempo and things, where it's like, okay, like, I get this, where are we going next? And for me, that's Mystify. I think that I almost feel like maybe it's a track they could have placed on X and held this one out for the next album. But I don't know. What do you think, Nub?
I've always hated this song. I never liked it. I always thought it was a really strange thing that it became as popular as it did. It's got the ingredient in it that is the thing I can't tolerate, which is I think it's emotionless. It just lacks emotion completely. I think you used the right word, formulaic. It's like a blues song or a country song. It has to sound like this. So they crowbarred the elements of the song into what it's supposed to be versus letting the thing happen organically, which you can't say about most of the other songs on the record. There may be a couple others, but it's easily my least favorite of all the hits. And it's in the bottom tier of the album for all those reasons.
I think that's well said. I always kind of wish that Never Tear Us Apart could take you right into this one. Title track, the upbeat and rather blazing Kick.
All the dreams, promises, will never give away. Sometimes you care, sometimes you get kicked, sometimes you kid.
Sometimes you get kicked, man.
You do, right in the arse, or right in the squaw in the nuts. Sometimes that happens too. Squaw in the nuts. I didn't really discover Kick until like 10 years ago. It's late in the album. It wasn't really one of the notable tracks that you heard. I mean, I think it was a medium single, maybe in some parts of the world. But when I discovered it, I was really excited. It was like, oh, this song's good. This is like a gem sort of late in the album. It's the title track, so you think you would have heard of it, but I think
you never met a title track you didn't like.
Oh,
you love title tracks. You do.
I don't know. There've been some that suck, but I like the energy of it, and I think that it's unique on the record. So as formulaic as Mystify was, I think this is the opposite. It really picks up tempo, some really sort of let loose vocals from Hutchence, really like reaching for it, which I like. And the horns and the progression, again, it's very simple progression. There's nothing tricky about this, but it really works in terms of being a perfect sort of foundation for this chorus and for kind of this main theme of the track. I think it's quite good. I almost wish the record ended here, but what do you think of Kick?
We've heard some James Brown, we've heard some funkadelic, more rock funk sort of things. We've heard some like Curtis Mayfield type of stuff. This is straight Motown. I mean, it's a Motown song, and it's cool to hear. I always like hearing people from, one part of the world imitate music from another part of the world. So to hear a bunch of Australians do their take on Motown is very cool. And especially as we talked about in the Four Tops Reach Out episode, Motown music is ingrained in us as Detroit area Michiganders. And so, to hear a different take on Motown is always cool. I really like Kick. I agree with you. I think it holds an important place in the album late, and it's just straight Motown, and you got to love it.
Close out with two tracks here, probably the two least known tracks or least renowned tracks on the record. Track 11 is Calling All Nations. Boy, is that produced or what?
Just a little.
I think they need a little more production on this one. I mean, there's a lot to like. It's cool that guitar looks cool, but it's not terribly memorable, but boy, it's almost production overload here. It's like Calling All Nations. It's like calling all producers, it's like, just chip in here. Let's add another layer. I mean, God only knows how many tracks are on this deal, but on the deal there, but second to last track, we're kind of winding down. It's got some decent energy to it, but not terribly memorable.
I do really like the strength of the sound. It's a ginormous sound just coming out of this song. So I dig that. You're right. It's a ton of production. And I think here you are capturing the guys a little bit just as players, but it's a stadium song. I don't know if they played this on the Kick tour, but it would have been an effective live song, at least, as they were promoting this record. But yeah, I like it more for the production value than the composition itself. But it's nice.
Well, again, I wish they would have closed the thing with the title track, but instead we close rather, immemorably, in my opinion, with Tiny Daggers. Just pretty.
You don't like it, huh?
I think it's kind of safe and kind of simple. And I mean, listen, they are obviously going for a fist pumper. I think to use your term, a bit of a stadium one here. And I mean, it works. I think most things on this record just, after they went through the production phase, work just fine. But, I don't find it to be one that sort of wraps it up in a bow the way you'd always prefer. And I think there were other opportunities and ways they could have, but is it one that you like, buddy?
Yeah, I do. I really like what they do at the end. When they have this keyboard layer at the end, it kind of brings the whole thing up. I think there's a pinnacle there. But look, let's be honest, T. This band, Inxs, is notorious for front loading their albums. I mean, they just did. every one of their records. Look at X.
It's a great point.
X is like one of the best side ones of all time. And aside from Hear That Sound, side 2 is like so forgettable. I mean, it really is, you know. They did the same thing on Elegantly Wasted. They did the same thing on Welcome to Wherever You Are.
Yeah.
Certainly did the same thing on Full Moon Dirty Hearts. And of course, Listen Like Thieves. I mean, they just piled side 1 always with, and not just the hits, but just the best stuff, you know. So it's probably one of the better side 2s they have in their whole catalog. Never Tear Us Apart and Wildlife, Calling All Nations, and of course the title track. So that's a big part of it. And I think Tiny Daggers works because of what they do at the end of it. I don't think it's an exceptional way to close the album, but I think it fits.
I think it's the type of song that any rock group in this era, I mean, that could be Bruce Springsteen, that could be, you know, insert a lot of other, not hair metal, but certainly pop rock acts of that time. And you could have sort of, you know, inserted anybody and it could have been their song. So to me, it just lacks a little bit of, you have so much originality throughout the entire record in terms of the sound and in terms of the riffing and the cadences and those things. And that one to me just seems like a, you know, rather cookie cutter, which, you know, from time to time, there were some moments on Kick, as we've talked about, that could sort of get that way and get in that direction. All right. Well, that's a wrap, buddy, on Kick. Did it matter?
I think it's a nice snapshot of the 80s in terms of uniqueness. It's a little bit like what we talked about with A Flock of Seagulls, the debut album. It's very 80s, but it's also super unique to what else was going on. You know, they were a little bit peerless in terms of their actual musical style. We mentioned a couple bands earlier, U2, Simple Minds, that maybe followed a similar trajectory, but Inxs sound was really unique to Inxs. It was very singular. And so I like the snapshot that it provides in the sense that it's quintessential 80s, but it's also very different from some of the other stuff that people might consider quintessential 80s, but really is sort of a load of crap. And we know who some of those bands are. So, but what's interesting about Inxs and Kick, it has not, you know, translated to the new generation. We talk about this a lot on the podcast. I don't think there's a kid out there in high school, middle school that would even know who Inxs is. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So yeah, I like the snapshot of it. For those of us that are 40 something, 50 something, I think this album means a lot. You know, I think this is one of those records that many people owned. So I think it's generational for sure, but it certainly matters to us. I would say, I think Kick is a key part of our musical upbringing. T, what do you think? Does it matter?
I think the only thing that really sort of mattered about Kick is the fusion element. I mean, this sax thing, this sort of R&B stuff, some of these funk beats, it was pretty unique and pretty innovative to sort of take guitar licks and put them over that. And then, of course, I think you make some great comparisons to James Brown and Motown and some other things that Hutchence certainly was into and certainly used as influences on a lot of these tracks. Other than that, you know, it really sort of doesn't. I mean, you don't really hear about it. It was a huge record at the time, and certainly there are some tracks that are timeless, but you don't really hear this as like a must-have or, you know, a record from the 80s that really defined it. It's kind of a feel-good, you know, sort of nostalgic thing. But in terms of really getting a lot of musical notoriety and a lot of musical acclaim, and who knows, maybe the band's abrupt ending with Hutchence's death had to do with that. And maybe they'd have a little bit more legacy if they were able to demonstrate some longevity. I mean, you know, but as far as being acclaimed and sort of notorious of the time, I'm not sure. And I think that probably it doesn't matter the way that some other records from this era did a little bit more and got a little bit deeper. You know, it's not an incredibly deep record. I mean, that's why Never Tear Us Apart, I think, is such a standout because, you know, as you said during it, you see some of that depth that in some cases during some of the cookie cutter moments and those type of things throughout the remainder of the record where they're really relying more on production than they are on really, really quality songs. I think you miss out on that from time to time here. So, yeah, probably didn't matter as much as it should, but whether it mattered or not, let's see where it stands on your final cut, Nub. Is it on the turntable? Is it in the collection? Is it collecting dust or is it in the for sale bin? What do you got on 1987's Inxs Kick, buddy?
I've got Kick in the collection because I think it stands as one of the best albums of the 80s. If you're going to build a well-rounded collection, have it in there. There are too many, I wouldn't say low points. That might be a little harsh, but it's not a cohesive experience top to bottom enough for me to put it on the turntable. But I got to tell you, T, that the side one, I mean, name me a better side one from the 80s in terms of pop music. I'd like to hear it because, I mean, you know, you're talking about hit songs, interesting songs, kind of a nice way to introduce the album. And, you know, it is one of the greatest frontmen that we experienced in the 80s and 90s and one who's gone. So this is sort of the legacy that's left. So I think in the collection, T, I think that this has a rightful place in any record collection that's worth a damn. Where do you get the final cut, T?
Well, I must not be worth a damn. I'm putting this in the for sale bin. And here's why, buddy. Great songs don't necessarily mean great album. And I think that when you look at some of the sort of lack of depth here, when you look at some of the moments where it becomes a little bit repetitive, when you look at the fact that you're inclined to flip track one, which I think is never a good sign. And quite honestly, I think it might be Inxs's. I mean, I know it's their most well-known album, but I think it's maybe their like fourth best. Welcome to Wherever You Are is in my collection, you know, and Kick's not. So I think that you can accomplish what you need to from this by going with an Inxs compilation. I know that's sacrilege, but I'm just going to say it. I think that, you know, when you look at some of the evolution of the group as they proceeded, there was some better work. Now, these songs are timeless. They're great. They're very nostalgic. They're very memorable. But I don't see a need to own this. I really don't. I think if you have Welcome to Wherever You Are and, you know, maybe X, if you're inclined, maybe, what is it? Shabua? How do you say it? How you say?
Oh, yeah.
You know, those type of things that captures a little bit of their earlier work. I mean, I sort of get that. But listen, I think Kick's a classic in the eyes of most, but I'm going for sale bin because I don't own it. And I don't really see a need to own it. I think you can accomplish what you need to by picking off the best tracks and sort of leaving the rest behind. I think it closes in a pretty weak fashion with the two tracks. I wish they would have ended it with Kick. I think they could have sized. I mean, it's already a fairly short album. These are not long songs, but I think they even could have trimmed a little bit more fat off of it just to make it super efficient. So, and
let's be honest. Not only is Welcome to Wherever You Are in your collection, but
yeah,
now you got a brand new copy of it.
Now I got an eco pack because you and the boys chipped in and got you this gift. Yes. Well, hey, listen, and thank you. Not every episode are you bearing gifts, you know, so I sure appreciate that. And let's see if I appreciate also what tracks you've been listening to here lately. You know, good songs don't necessarily mean great album, but you know, good songs are still good songs. So let's see what's in your head.
I was going to say only one Dolores. There you go. Two. All right.
What's in your head, Nubbles?
Well, what's in my head right now is a band that just reunited, which is great news to me as a huge fan. And that is the band Mudvayne and the song Not Falling. They just played their first show in 12 years or 13 years or something like that. Good to have the boys from Peoria, Illinois back. And I've been listening to Not Falling quite a bit. Second would be from a band that I was supposed to see recently, but they postponed their tour, which is really sad because love these guys. And that is Chevelle with the
Did they do it because of that stupid, pesky, snooping, chewing at your heels coronavirus? Is that why they did it?
Yeah, they did. Yep. That darn thing, you know. And Joyride Omen from not the new album, but the one that came out before it. And third would be a kind of deep cut from Avril Lavigne's Under My Skin, which is a great Avril Lavigne album. And that is Forgotten, which is a song where she really sings her heart out. And I love Forgotten. So
it's a great album. Hey, a quick health update as we wrap. How are you feeling? You know, is the COVID gone? Can you smell? Can you taste? You got any like lasting effects? I mean, what's up? You good?
Oh, from my bout with the vid?
Yeah. Right.
No, things have been really good. I appreciate you asking. My voice hasn't fully recovered. That's kind of one of the long-standing byproducts.
You do sound a little raspy, but
yeah,
I thought maybe you were going for the Michael Hutchence sexiness. You know?
Oh, dude, listen, if I could even come close to the level, to the ooziness of sexiness that he was. No, that's about it. And smell and taste are back. So I never lost my taste. Thank God. That's what I was really dreading the most.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, all good. All good.
Good to hear, buddy. Glad to hear it.
T, what is you don't have the vid, do you? You got the vid?
Everyone's
gonna get the vid.
I've somehow avoided. I kind of want to get it, just build up that immunity.
Yes, yeah, totally.
But no, I've been able to sidestep the thing. But
nice.
that thing's really pesky. It might bite me right in the caboose.
It can do a few things. Yeah,
when I'm not looking. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. T, what is in your head?
I got a track by New Orleans owned The Meters called Punji. That's off Look Up Hi Pi. Great record. Love the first 2-3 records from those guys. A band Styx that you talk about a lot, and that's Fooling Yourself, Angry Young Man, which is maybe my favorite Styx song. I don't know. There's a lot.
Yeah, it's really
There's a lot to choose from. Was that on the one we did? We did Pieces of Eight. Is that on that record?
No, it's on The Grand Illusion.
Okay.
The one that came out right before it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love that track.
The album that's like all hits, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the third, speaking of, just a smash hit, is by Rodney James Dio. I've just been loving Holy Diver. I mean, I know it's kind of, it's kind of a go-to. It's not very adventurous Dio, but
Holy Diver.
Yeah, but it's great Dio. I mean, come on, Rodney.
It's really good Dio. It's not as good as The Last in Line or Rainbow in the Dark, but it's still really good.
Rainbow in the Dark's pretty sweet. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a better synth part than Rainbow in the Dark?
Oh, it's totally phenomenal. Totally phenomenal. Nub, do you feel like you kicked or do you feel like you got kicked?
I feel like we kicked some serious ass.
Well, speak for yourself. I personally think I was like a C+ at best. But Nubs enjoyed it. Looking at this late 80s classic back when we were just little tykes, but we still realized that there was something special going on with this band and with this record. And they certainly turned in a classic, and it was fun to talk about, buddy.
Sure was, man. Great choice. And, a little sad that you're sending your copy of Kick to the for sale bin, but somebody will gobble it up and enjoy it,
Hey, listen, that's what the final cut is all about. A nice, fair and balanced assessment. And we hope that you found episode 64, Nub, to be fair and balanced and wonderful. And hopefully it gave you a nice little pick me up heading into your weekend. And certainly we feel picked up, don't we, Nub? Hey, by the way, we have a fantasy football matchup against each other on Sunday. So I just officially want to say bad luck.
Don't worry. You're going to get me. I've already resigned myself that I'm taking that L this week.
I don't know. I'm 2-5. I'm having a horrible year, but it is always nice to square up. In fact, I don't know if we've talked about this. Last year, you joined my fantasy football league for the first year with me and a bunch of buddies. And freaking Nubs comes in and wins the damn thing in year one. And who did he beat in the finals? Yours truly. And I was like, they have the favorites. I was favored by like 40 points. I had such a better team on paper. And, Nubs just wins the freaking league in year one. So this is my first chance at a little bit of payback. So hopefully that goes well here on Sunday.
I will never manage a fantasy team better than that performance last year. I had no business winning that league and, found a way.
Notice how he puts it all in the manager. Puts it all
in fantasy football, it does have a lot to do with it,
Yeah. Well,
players win games. Players win.
More importantly, both our teams suck right now. Maybe we can both. Lions can get themselves off the schneid, and the freaking Chiefs don't even get me started. Anyway,
let's just make one thing clear: the Detroit Lions are not kicking; they are getting kicked. Right?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think both squads are getting kicked pretty good right now. But hey, hopefully they will find a new sensation, here in the back half of the season.
Hey-o. Because being a Lions fan, it's like having a devil inside.
Yeah, that's an old sensation, right there of losing, But hey, Nubs, thanks, buddy. And we will see you next for episode 65. Where we will bring you something hopefully rather delightful here on Two Twins and an album. Y'all take care and be good.
Two twins.
Well, that's about it. That's all we have. I hope it wasn't too disappointing. We will see you on tour. Until then, take it easy.